Then a sudden surge of light and sound began at the cave mouth, pulling attention toward an emerging threat. Nightfall kept the group near the cave mouth as arguments and barter plans continued. Qingxuan remained seated on fractured stone with her leg wrapped, and she insisted on being carried out. Observers kept distance and calculated profit while Brother B watched from the grass. A disguised man smirked and resolved to exploit her injury to demand high rewards. The armored figure stepped forward and examined her wound with a steady tone. He identified poison from a crystal scorpion and asked how someone so strong had been hurt. Conversation stalled as a sudden surge of light and sound brightened the cave mouth. Plans to monetize the beast and to move Qin Xuan tightened into urgent decisions as all eyes turned outward toward the emerging threat. Nightfall kept the group near the cave mouth as arguments and barter plans continued. Qin Xuan remained seated on fractured stone with her leg wrapped and insisted on being carried out. Observers kept distance and measured profit while Brother B watched from the grass, and a disguised man plotted to exploit her injury. The armored figure stepped forward and probed the wound, then identified poison from a crystal scorpion. Conversation stalled as a sudden flare brightened the cave mouth and urgent choices formed. Qin Xuan summoned a slim dagger that pulsed with purple light and said it was the beast soul of a poison heart butterfly. She warned that her injury did not weaken her and taunted the armor, provoking a vivid shimmer as butterfly energy coalesced around the blade. Night kept the group near the cave mouth as bargaining and schemes circled. Qin Xuan remained seated on fractured stone with her leg bound and demanded to be carried out. The armored figure examined the wound and suspected poison from a crystal scorpion. A flare lit the cave mouth as Qin Xuan produced a slim dagger pulsing purple and named it the Poison Heart Butterfly Beast Soul. She warned her injury would not weaken her, and the blade shimmered with butterfly energy. The armored figure raised a placating hand and denied any other intentions, saying he only followed the request to carry her out. Observers stepped back and measured profit as attention tightened. Han Sen watched closely and wondered if Qin Xuan had a mind-reading skill, which made the group hesitate over their next choices. Night kept the group at the cave mouth, while bargaining and schemes moved among them. Qin Xuan sat on fractured stone with her leg bound and demanded to be carried. She offered a generous reward and asked if the armored man had traded with Su Zio Kaio. The armored figure bore horned armor and a sack over one shoulder. He admitted he needed money, but said he would not rush dangerous deals. He then asked whether that mutated poison crystal scorpion she mentioned had died. Qin Xuan produced a slim dagger pulsing purple and named it the Poison Heart Butterfly. She warned the injury would not weaken her and kept the blade visible. The armored figure raised a placating hand and denied other intentions. Observers stepped back and measured profit while choices among them tightened. Han Sen watched closely and wondered if Qin Xuan could read minds. Night kept the group at the cave mouth while bargaining and schemes moved among them. Qin Xuan sat on fractured stone with her leg bound and kept a slim dagger visible. She had named the blade Poison Heart Butterfly and warned the wound would not weaken her. She challenged the armored figure about hunting poison crystal scorpions and whether any had hurt him. The armored figure bore horned armor and a sack and admitted he needed funds. He refused reckless deals, yet offered to escort her out without taking money. Instead, he demanded a mutated rank soul, beast, as the reward for his service. Observers stepped back and measured profit while choices among them tightened. Han Sen watched closely and wondered if Qin Xuan could read minds. Tension rose and the group's options narrowed. The scorpion lay sprawled on stone beneath fractured cave walls with blood pooled nearby. An unknown voice loudly declared that the mutated rank poison crystal scorpion would be theirs. The declaration hardened the group's choices and sharpened the trading and bargaining. Observers calculated profit, while Qin Xuan remained seated with her dagger visible and wound bound. The armored figure refused reckless deals, but demanded that a mutated rank beast become payment. Han Sen watched from the shadows and measured threats and possible betrayals. Night then shifted them to the bottomless pit's mountain forest under cold starlight and mist. Fog rolled through pines and obscured the lower valleys with drifting gray. Treetops shivered in a faint breeze, while distant stars pierced the thin night haze. Silence weighed on them as votes and offers slowly hardened into action. The scorpion lay dead on fractured cave stone. Traders and hunters sharpened their offers and hardened their aims. Observers calculated profit, while Qin Xuan sat with a bound wound and a dagger showing. The armored figure refused reckless trades and demanded a mutated beast for payment. Han Sen watched from shadow and measured threats and betrayal. Night moved them to the bottomless pit mountain forest under cold starlight and drifting mist. Fog slid through pines and hid the lower valleys. Silence fell as votes and offers hardened into action. The armored figure carried Qin Xuan through dim trees toward the sanctuary. Qin Xuan told him to put her down at the main gate. He agreed and noted hiding her presence would prevent trouble. They reached the sanctuary gate beneath cold starlight and drifting mist. The armored figure carried Qin Xuan across rocky ground and set her down gently. Her wound was bound and a dagger still showed at her side. They paused among pines while the armored figure warned that hiding Qin Xuan would prevent trouble. He spoke of the poison crystal scorpion's corpse and how one man had eaten its unusable parts. He noted the scorpion failed to pierce his armor during the fight. Qin Xuan considered whether the beast was a sacred soul and watched him closely. The armored figure then claimed ownership, calling it his mutated rank soul beast. No one else appeared at the gate, and silence kept the forest watchful. Plans to leave Qin Xuan with passing strangers were deferred until they reached safety. After the armored figure claimed the mutated poison crystal scorpion as his, they paused beneath pines. Negotiations followed when a buyer asked whether the sacred beast soul and sacred axe were for sale. The armored figure refused to sell the beast soul but named a price for the axe. He offered one mutated beast soul with the axe for 2 million sanctuary credits. Qin Xuan tightened her arms and warned the axe could not leave the sanctuary grounds. She insisted the weapon's use was restricted and rejected his opening price as unreasonable. She countered flatly, raising the demand to 6 million and setting a hard limit. The watchful forest held its breath while they argued, plans to hide Qin Xuan postponed. The sale remained unresolved as shadows closed and no other travelers appeared. The armored figure gave a terse order to the buyer, telling him to prepare the money and to inform Su Zio Kaio about the trade location and timing. He had already refused to part with the sacred beast soul and named terms for the axe, insisting on an exchange and a price. Qin Xuan watched him with narrowed eyes and thought him greedy, her stance unyielding after she raised the demand and forbade the weapon from leaving sanctuary grounds. Negotiations stalled as both sides held to their limits, and no traveler stepped forward to break the deadlock. The scene cut outward to the steel armor sanctuary, where clouds gathered and narrow shafts of light pierced the sky. The courtyard waited empty while shadows lengthened, and the unresolved sale hung over the silent compound. The courtyard had stayed empty and tense after the trade faltered beneath shafts of light. Negotiations had stalled, and the compound waited while no traveler broke the deadlock. Then Han Hao appeared, bearing a heavy bag over his shoulder as he crossed the stone. Onlookers turned, and one voice called his name aloud. A small cluster of youths stepped forward and fixed their gaze on him. A youth with a red headband mocked him, asking why he pretended not to know them. Han Hao's jaw tightened, and he gave no answer. Sweat showed at his temple as silence stretched and observers shifted. His refusal to respond left the sanctuary uneasy, while Qin Xuan's demand and the unresolved sale still loomed over the compound. The courtyard remained tense after the trade collapsed under pillars of harsh sunlight. Negotiations had stalled, and the compound waited while no traveler dared cross the square. Han Sen approached along the stone path, carrying a heavy sack over his shoulder. Onlookers turned when someone called his name, and voices rose with curiosity. He halted, glanced back sharply, and asked in a low voice what was wanted. A youth with a red headband stepped forward and confronted him with accusation. The youth claimed Han Sen had provoked Qin Xuan and Shen Tianzi at the market. He announced he had words to tell Han Sen and demanded an answer now. Han Sen remained silent, jaw tight, sweat forming at his temple as observers watched. The unresolved sale and Qin Xuan's demand still loomed over the uneasy compound. The courtyard had remained tense after the market sale collapsed beneath harsh sunlight. Han Sen approached on the stone path, carrying a heavy sack across his shoulder. A youth with a red headband stepped forward and confronted him with accusation. Han Sen asked what he wanted with a low voice and narrowed eyes. The youth insisted Han Sen never claim any cousin ties or mention knowing him. He said he had just started and feared his future would be ruined by association. Han Sen agreed to keep the secret and stated they were strangers in the sanctuary world. He then turned the thought inward and addressed Han Hao over how ties mattered. Observers watched in silence as Qin Xuan's demand and the unresolved sale continued to loom. Han Sen's gaze hardened and his jaw tightened under the courtyard light. The courtyard had stayed tense after the failed sale and the headband youth's warning. Han Sen returned to his room with the sack and set it down on the table. He opened the display cases and exposed rows of gems, a pile of gold, and packets of cash. He counted the stacks with steady hands and allowed himself a brief smile as he declared his future would be better. He still remembered being looked down on and had agreed to remain strangers in the sanctuary world. Qin Xuan's demand and the unresolved sale hovered over the market like a silent threat. Observers remained in the shadows outside the courtyard. Han Sen thought of Han Hao and the cost of ties. He felt satisfaction, but kept his gaze hard and plans guarded as he prepared his next moves. Han Sen had returned inward and kept plans guarded while tension still lingered in the market. Nearby, a different scene played out beneath clear sky and the mall's bright signage. A man guided a young girl and a woman toward a shop labeled Sapphire Ice Cream. The storefront bore a large cone emblem and a yellow sign above the door. He took the girl's hand and promised to let her eat until she was satisfied. They passed a cotton candy vendor and other shoppers as they entered through glass doors. The girl, Yan Yan, beamed and shouted that Big Brother's treats were the best. The small family moment cut through the day and offered a brief, ordinary joy amid the unresolved threats and silent observers. Tension from earlier still lingered across the market, but the mall sheltered a brief, ordinary scene beneath bright signage and a clear sky. A man guided Yan Yan and her mother toward the Sapphire Ice Cream storefront that bore a large cone emblem and a yellow sign. He took the girl's hand and promised treats until she was satisfied. They passed a cotton candy vendor and drifting shoppers as they stepped through the glass doors. The mother hesitated at the price and called to Zio Sen to be sensible and save money. Zio Sen smiled confidently and reassured her that he had earned money. He then revealed he had obtained a mutated gene, which softened the mother's concern and surprised her silently. Yan Yan beamed and praised her big brother. Nearby silhouettes kept moving, and the ordinary moment contrasted with the unresolved threats and watchful observers still lingering. Tension from earlier lingered across the mall despite bright signs and a clear sky. Xiao Sen guided Yan Yan and mother toward the dessert store with steady steps. He promised treats and spoke about becoming stronger and earning more money. Inside, he cheerfully revealed he had obtained a mutated gene to calm them. Her mother relaxed, and Yan Yan beamed at her big brother's boast. They headed for the second floor, where the famous dessert store was crowded. A store clerk stepped forward and barred their path with an outstretched hand. The clerk told them they could not go up and blocked the stairs. Xiao Sen demanded to know why, his expression hard and direct while onlookers shifted nearby. Earlier tension still clung to the mall as sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling. Xiao Sen guided Yan Yan and her mother toward the crowded dessert store and kept his steps steady. A framed plaque hung beside the stairs, and a well-dressed clerk stepped forward to block their path. He extended his hand and announced the second floor was reserved for celebrities and noble patrons only. Xiao Sen's jaw tightened, and he repeated the words under his breath, testing their meaning. Yan Yan looked up at her brother, trusting him to fix the moment. Their mother moved closer and softened her voice to calm the scene. She asked them to wait at the side and told Xiao Sen to buy ice cream for Yan Yan. Onlookers shifted and peered while the clerk held his polite barrier. Xiao Sen hesitated, then chose the small compromise to protect the child's hope. Tension lingered in the mall as sunlight cut across the floor. Xiao Sen guided Yan Yan and her mother toward the dessert counter while the store clerk moved to block their path. He agreed aloud to the clerk and took the small compromise to buy ice cream for Yan Yan. The child trusted him, and the mother soothed the moment. Xiao Sen's jaw tightened when he read the framed plaque that declared celebrities and nobles only. He murmured those words and cataloged the slight as humiliation flared. He suppressed the anger, let resolve harden, and swore he would own everything rather than yield to such notices. Onlookers peered, the clerk held his polite barrier, and Xiao Sen masked his vow behind a steady face. Tension lingered in the mall as bright sunlight cut across the tiled floor. Xiao Sen guided Yan Yan and her mother to the dessert counter while a clerk blocked them. He read the framed plaque that reserved service for celebrities and nobles and felt humiliation flare. He suppressed his anger and hardened a private vow to own everything rather than yield. Then Qin Xuan appeared, and Xiao Sen called her name in shock. He cursed inwardly about repeated awkward encounters and tried to stay composed. Qin Xuan spat an insult, calling him naturally disgusting and quoting his words. Nearby voices accused a man of touching her beast and confirmed they had seen it. Onlookers watched closely, and the clerk maintained a careful, polite distance between parties. Xiao Sen kept a steady face while resolve and danger gathered around the small group. Sunlight still cut over the floor as Xiao Sen had guided Yan Yan and her mother toward the dessert counter, where a clerk had blocked them behind a reserved plaque. Humiliation had flared inside Xiao Sen, and he had vowed privately to never yield again. Then Qin Xuan had appeared, her voice sharp, and the small crowd had turned. She accused a nearby man of using the sudden stop to molest her, spitting contempt and demanding truth. The man had grinned nervously and insisted it was a misunderstanding, blaming the train's violent halt for people falling into one another. Onlookers watched closely, and some confirmed they had seen inappropriate contact. As accusations and threats gathered, a public announcement ordered passengers to leave, and the train arrived at the teleport station. Xiao Sen kept a steady face while danger and resolve thickened around the group. Sunlight still cut across the station floor as the confrontation continued and tension rose. Qin Xuan stepped forward, spoke with a hard edge, and accused the man aloud. She promised she would wait for him at the sanctuary and not relent. Uniformed guards formed a line and called out, "Greetings to Station Head Qin. the accused offered nervous explanations, blaming the sudden halt for people colliding. Several witnesses contradicted him and reported inappropriate contact during the abrupt stop. A public announcement ordered passengers to disembark as the teleport train reached the station. Zhao Sen absorbed the revelation and felt alarm at Qin Xuan's formal rank and control. He feared the garrison could locate him any time and tightened his resolve to act. Power in the carriage shifted. Anonymity and safety had become immediate liabilities. Sunlight slanted across the station, while guards and witnesses pressed the accusation. Qin Xuan stepped forward and said she would wait at the sanctuary, asserting control. Uniformed guards acknowledged her, and a public announcement ordered passengers to disembark. Zhao Sen felt alarm at her formal rank and understood anonymity had become a liability. He left the carriage, muttered about bad luck, and resolved to avoid Qin Xuan to protect his gold coin identity. He moved along the plaza, bracing for pursuit. A coarse man across the way shouted and called him butt manic while waving a promise of good things. The sudden call cut into the moment, forced Zhao Sen to focus, and left him tensed and ready to act as the station stayed watchful. Sunlight slanted across the station as guards pressed the accusation, and Qin Xuan asserted control at the sanctuary. Zhao Sen left the carriage, felt exposed by her rank, and moved through the plaza to avoid attention. A coarse man shouted crude nicknames from across the way and waved promises of opportunity. Zhao Sen muttered about bad luck and tried to keep to his plan. A voice mocked large-scale fights and said small noobs should not join. Zhao Sen smiled and declined, then a rough hand seized his collar and pulled him forward. The man ordered him to come without excuses. Zhao Sen tensed and resisted briefly before they moved off through the crowd. The scene cut to the deserted mountains forest, signaling a quick change of setting. Sunlight slanted across the station as guards pressed accusations, and Qin Xuan asserted control over the sanctuary. Zhao Sen left the carriage and sought to avoid attention in the plaza. A coarse man mocked him and seized his collar, forcing him through the crowd. The scene then shifted to the deserted mountains forest, where rain streaked between the trees. A line of paid fighters ran along a muddy path, their steps driving them deeper into the woods. They boasted about Shen Tianzi's generosity and the money he had given them. They said he had slain primordial creatures and provided meat for them to split and eat. The men vowed to work hard to repay Shen Tianzi and continued into the rain until their voices faded. Sunlight slanted across the station while guards pressed accusations and Qin Xuan asserted control. Zhao Sen left the carriage and moved through the plaza to avoid attention. Rain streaked between trees in the deserted mountains forest as paid fighters ran along a muddy path. They boasted of Shen Tianzi's generosity and of the meat he had provided them. The men vowed loyalty and marched deeper into the woods until their voices faded. After days on the road, they still met a few primordial creatures, each encounter brief and manageable. One fighter wondered why Shen Tianzi and Luo Tianyang had called so many people and what plan lay ahead. The column crested a ridge and stopped before a vast crater scarred in the forest. Small figures poured toward the rim and took position. Two men stepped forward and announced that they had arrived. At the crater rim, the leader barked orders and sent the paid fighters forward. He urged the group to lead and explore the forest without delay. He singled out Butt Manic, slapped his head, and ordered him to perform. The fighters moved to their positions and fanned out toward the tree line. Zhao Sen bristled at the command and refused to volunteer. He judged the cave ahead as dangerous from a glance. The men assumed someone had to lead and expected him to step up. Voices thinned as scouts entered the shadowed path, and day gave way to enclosed green. The page cut to the cave interior, and a caption named the place the Nether Dark Cave. Darkness filled the panel, and silhouettes hinted at deep hollows beyond the light. The paid fighters stepped into the nether dark cave, torches cutting through the dark. The leader cautioned them to walk slowly, warning something might pop out. Zio-sen stayed back and refused to volunteer to lead. The men argued about who should go forward as voices thinned. A brash fighter shouted for speed and the remaining money, urging them to move faster. Torches threw hard light across cracked stone, while low hollows swallowed the shadows. Drafts flickered the flames and cold air moved along their ankles. Each step echoed and tension tightened the thin formation. No creature emerged, but unease spread quickly among the fighters. The path dipped and curved, revealing wider hollows that swallowed the torchlight. The panel closed on that dim threshold as the group braced to continue. The paid fighters reached the cave's end and halted where the tunnel opened to a low pool. A narrow mouth beyond the water glowed orange, and the light pooled on the wet stone. Torches bobbed and threw narrow reflections across the shallow surface. Cold drafts moved along their ankles, and their voices had thinned to wary whispers. Zio-sen remained back and refused to lead the crossing. The men argued over who should go forward, while a brash fighter urged haste for the remaining pay. No creature emerged in the glow, only dripping rock answered them. They tightened formation along the slick bank and checked their grips on the torches. Each tentative step echoed and drew the group tighter. They braced to wade the water and enter the mouth, prepared for what the next moments might demand of them. The paid fighters reached the water and found the tunnel blocked by rock. One man told Luo Tianyang there was no road ahead. Luo raised his arm and ordered the group to cross the river. He tossed several inflatable boats across the current toward the opposite cave. Torches jittered and their reflections cut across the shallow surface. Zio-sen stayed near the bank and refused to lead the crossing. The men debated the plan while a brash fighter worried about unpaid fees. A kneeling fighter lined over a boat and tested its seam with a torchlight. Others secured ropes and pulled a boat within reach of the shore. Cold drafts rose from the river, and the group tightened their grips on torches. They braced to wade the water and prepared to row to the far cave. The paid fighters reached the water and found the tunnel blocked by rock. Luo Tianyang ordered them to cross and tossed several inflatable boats across the current. Torches jittered and reflections cut across the shallow surface as men debated the plan. They secured ropes, tested a boat seam, and braced to wade and to row. Zio-sen stayed near the bank and inspected the boats without volunteering to lead. He noted the boats seemed prepared ahead of time and asked what lay beyond the opposite cave. Coins struck the water and skittered across the current, drawing several men's attention. Zio-sen watched the scattered tokens and wondered why Shen Tianzi and others did not board. Cold drafts rose from the river, and the group tightened their grips on torches as they readied to cross. The paid fighters had edged into the shallow current and braced to cross the tunnel. Zio-sen stayed at the bank and inspected the boats without volunteering to lead. Coins had skittered across the water and drawn several men's attention. Cold drafts rose from the river and torches jittered as the group strained to see. Then ripples raced outward, and small reflections sped downstream like thrown tokens. Zio-sen's eyes widened, and he wondered what had happened. The water erupted with a bright spray as something massive broke the surface. A dark shape leapt clear and sent a shock through the men and boats. Torches flared and ropes tightened as the group held fast, watching the thing vanish beneath the current. The followers had edged into the river and braced against the strong current. Zio-sen stayed on the bank and watched the boats with guarded concern. Coins had skittered across the water, and several men bent to retrieve them. Cold drafts rose from the river, and torches jittered against the night. Then ripples raced outward, and small reflections sped downstream like thrown tokens. The water erupted in a bright spray as something massive broke the surface. The beasts broke the surface and sent a shock through the rafts. Torches flared, ropes tightened, and the followers held fast to their craft. The beasts reared again, driving a towering column of water and debris. Small boats were thrown, and men cried out as the river convulsed. The beasts vanished beneath the current, but left chaos on the surface. The followers braced their boats against the river's strong current, while scattered coins skidded across the water. Men bent to retrieve the tokens as cold drafts rose and torches jittered in the night. Ripples raced outward, and the water shattered when the beasts broke the surface. Rafts shuddered as towering columns of spray and debris rose. Occupants shouted, ropes tightened, and several small boats were thrown by the surging current. The beasts dove beneath the waves and left chaos on the surface. Amid the turmoil, a terrified voice pleaded for rescue, and 3 men in a boat stared wide-eyed. A dark-haired occupant sprang to attention. From the bank, a man in a white coat stepped forward and announced the sacred rank creature had finally appeared.